OFAC trouble rarely starts with someone missing a name. That's the version everyone fears, the analyst who somehow skips a blocked party. It almost never happens that way. It starts with three quieter mistakes. Each one looks harmless on a Tuesday. Each one shows up in the consent orders. Here's the first one, and it's the most common by a wide margin. You screen the customer at onboarding. Clean, green light. And then you never screen them again. The logic feels reasonable. You check them when they joined. Why recheck someone who already passed? Here's why. The SDN list, the specially designated nationals list that OFAC maintains, is not static. OFAC adds names, changes names, and updates entries constantly. A person or company that wasn't on the list when you onboarded them can be added next quarter. So the customer didn't change, your risk did. And if you're only screening at onboarding, you have no way of knowing. Now add the part that catches even careful teams. Ownership moves too. There's something called the 50% rule. OFAC's guidance says that any entity owned 50% or more, directly or indirectly, by one or more blocked parties is itself blocked, even if that entity's own name never appears on the SDN list. Think about what that means. A company you screened last year was clean. This year, a sanctioned individual quietly acquires a controlling stake through a couple of holding companies. The company's name still isn't on any list, but under the 50% rule, it's now blocked. Every payment you process for it is a violation. You would never catch that with onboarding only screening. The name didn't change, the ownership did, 2 layers up, in a structure you can't see unless you go looking. This is why continuous or event-driven rescreening exists. You rescreen when the list changes. You rescreen when ownership changes. You rescreen on a schedule, not just once at the front door. A customer base that's screened once is a snapshot of a risk that keeps moving. Second mistake. This one is technical, and that's exactly why it gets ignored. Sanction screening runs on fuzzy matching. Names don't come in clean. Muhammad versus Muhammad. Limited versus limited. Transliterations from Arabic, Russian, or Chinese that can be spelled 5 different ways in English. So the screening engine doesn't look for exact matches. It scores similarity. And you set a threshold. How close does a name have to be before the system raises an alert? Here's the trap. Most teams set that threshold once, early, by guesswork. Somebody picked a number that felt about right, and it never got revisited. Set it too loose, and every batch throws thousands of weak matches. Your analysts drown. When a team is clearing 800 alerts a day, the real hit, the one that actually matters, gets cleared in the same 3 seconds as the noise. Alert fatigue isn't a soft problem. It's how a true positive gets waved through. Set it too tight and you've done the opposite. You've told the system to only flag near exact matches. So the sanctioned party who spells their name slightly differently or routes through an entity with a transliterated variation sails straight past. No alert, no record, nothing. You didn't miss the name because your analyst was careless. You missed it because your threshold decided, silently, that it wasn't close enough to look at. And here's the part regulators care about. Can you explain how you set that threshold? Was it tuned against your actual customer base and your actual risk, and tested and documented? Or did someone guess in 2021 and nobody's touched it since? Those two answers land very differently in an exam. A threshold is a risk decision. Guessing at it is making a risk decision by accident. Third mistake, and this is the one that turns a near miss into a fine. An alert fires. Your analyst looks at it. It's a false positive. A customer named Ivan Petrov, who is very obviously not the Ivan Petrov on the SDN list. Different date of birth, different country, different everything. Your analyst clears it correctly and moves on. Here's the problem. What did they write down? At a lot of institutions, the answer is nothing, or one word, reviewed, or the analyst's initials and a timestamp. The decision was right, the record of the decision doesn't exist. Now roll forward, OFAC opens an inquiry, or your regulator runs a sanctions exam and they pull that cleared alert. They ask a simple question: why did you clear this? What did the analyst see that told them this was not a match? If your answer is, we looked at it and we were confident, you don't have a control, you have a memory. And the analyst who cleared it left the company 18 months ago. This is where strict liability comes in, and it's worth saying plainly. US sanctions are strict liability. That means OFAC does not have to prove you intended to violate anything. You processed a payment for a blocked party. That's the violation. Full stop. Your intent, your good faith, your we honestly thought it was clean, none of that is a defense to the violation itself. What your program and your records do affect is the penalty. OFAC's enforcement guidelines look hard at the quality of your compliance program when they decide what a settlement looks like. A clean, evidenced screening process with documented clearing decisions is a mitigating factor. A black hole where your reasoning should be is an aggravating one. So the record isn't paperwork. In a strict liability world, the record of why you cleared a hit is one of the few things standing between a control process and a much larger number in a consent order. Let me tie these together because they are the same failure wearing three costumes. Screen once and never again. You're blind to a risk that moves. Guess at your threshold. You're blind to matches the system decided not to show you. Keep no record of clearing decisions. You're blind to your own reasoning after the fact. In most areas of compliance, showing you acted in good faith buys you something. With OFAC, it doesn't erase the violation. That's what strict liability means. So the entire game shifts from did we mean well to can we show on paper that our screening was current, tuned and reasoned. Every one of these three mistakes attacks that ability to show your work. That's why they end up in the same enforcement actions over and over. So what does a screening program that survives an exam look like? It rescreens continuously, not just at onboarding. When the SDN list updates, your customer base gets checked against it. When ownership shifts, you catch the 50% rule exposure before you process the next payment, not after. Its thresholds are tuned deliberately against your real customers and your real risk, tested for both the noise problem and the slip-through problem, and documented so you can explain the number in a room with a regulator. And every clearing decision carries its reasoning. Who cleared it, when, and the specific evidence that made it a false positive. So when someone asks about an alert from 6 months ago, the answer is a record, not a shrug. None of this is exotic. It's continuous instead of once, tuned instead of guessed, evidenced instead of remembered. 3 small shifts. They're the difference between a screening program that's a control and one that just looks like one until the day someone asks. I'm building Flux Force because I kept seeing good compliance teams fail exams they should have passed, purely because they couldn't show their work. AI agents can rescreen continuously, surface the ownership changes that trip the 50% rule, and hold a clean evidence trail for every clearing decision. Aiden Flux runs fraud detection today, and the sanctions side is where a lot of this thinking is going. The human still owns the call. The agent makes sure the reasoning is there when someone asks. If you own OFAC screening and you've been burnt by one of these 3 or dodged it, I want to hear which one and what you changed. Tell me in the comments, link in the description. I'll see you in the next one.